just so can we make sure that it.
Glenn, we're live. I think we're good whenever you want to go, and I'll wait for this.
Is he ready? Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Wygod. I'm the Commissioner of Athletics for the CIF Southern section, and I would like to welcome you to our press conference today. Thank you to the members of the media who have joined us, as well as those of you who are watching on our website or our YouTube channel. This endeavor began months ago in April, after the cancellation of spring sports. We've been constantly working each and every day on this plan to deliver fall, winter, and spring sports during the 2020-2021 school year. I would like to thank CIF Executive Director Ron Nichetti, Associate Executive Director Brian Seymour, my fellow section commissioners around the other 9 sections of our state, and our Southern section staff, their hard work, dedication, and professionalism in getting this job done. As you know, the possible scenarios related to the COVID-19 pandemic have changed constantly due to the ever-changing situation we've been dealing with since mid-March. They have changed even more dramatically in just the last couple of weeks. So I would like to take a few moments to highlight some important elements of our plan that we released this morning. First, 2 seasons. All sports will be conducted in 2 seasons, fall and spring. The reason for that was to help with the overlap of sports, trying to have some separation between the 2 seasons to allow for dual sport athletes, for coaches who coach more than one sport, and for maximizing the utilization of school facilities. Regular seasons. The length of the regular seasons will be 90% to 100% what they normally are, with no reduction in the number of maximum allowable contests in each sport. Section championships. We will have the same number of section champions in each sport, the same number of divisions in each sport, and the same number of guaranteed entries from leagues that advance into the Southern Section Championships in each sport. CIF Regional and CIF State Championships. The CIF State Office announced that the CIF State and or Regional Championships will be condensed so that these competitions would last no longer than 1 week in each sport. In terms of the distribution of sports into these 2 seasons, there are instances where there are more sports in each of these 2 seasons than you normally would see spread across 3 seasons of sport. But there is no way that you can go from a time frame of August through June to December through June and be able to offer every single sport in the same manner without the months of August, September, October, and November in play. The alternative would be to just cancel an entire season or seasons. In other words, since the fall season couldn't fit into the traditional window of August through November, December, we would have had to announce the cancellation of the fall season today and hope that the winter season could start. And if not that the spring season when that time comes. I do not believe that anyone preferred that option, but would hope that we could have fall, winter, and spring sports during the 2020-2021 school year. That's been our focus for the last 4 months, and that is what we announced today. I have stated previously that if we're going to have fall, winter, and spring sports this upcoming school year, it will require vision, creativity, flexibility, teamwork, and an unwavering commitment from all involved to get this job done. This has been a call to leadership, and I believe we've answered that call today. We all have a tremendous amount of work to do in the time ahead to deliver what our student athletes, coaches, parents, and school communities want us to deliver. I truly believe we can do it, and it's my hope and expectation that we will continue to do this important work together with our principals, athletic directors, and coaches in service to the young men and the young women that we are so fortunate to serve. I believe our student athletes will be supportive of this plan. I think they will be appreciative of the fact we have no plans to cancel seasons or sports, and while no doubt there will be difficult choices that have to be made by everyone to make this work, I think our young people know that it is preferable to have an opportunity to at least make a choice than to not have the chance to do that at all, which is what happened to us all last April when the spring sports seasons were canceled. My final thought is it will be vitally important that we adults do everything we can to come through for our student athletes and show them a unified front going forward. Our student athletes have had enough negativity over the last few months, and they are looking for us to bring them some positive news for the future. We have done that for them today, and the last thing they need going forward will be negative reactions and responses from adults who will take the optimism that they have and they are so looking forward to away from them. This is when we show them that we can get the job done, no matter what struggles we will all have to endure to make it happen. And what an opportunity we now have to teach them that we can do this and we can do it together, whatever it takes. My staff and I are willing to accept that challenge, and I hope that all of our stakeholders are ready to accept that challenge as well. With that said, I'm happy to take your questions.
Our first question is from Fred Robledo of the San Gabriel Valley News. You have to unmute, Fred.
Thank you, Tom. Rob, thank you for having me on this call. Were you close at any time to being able to play high school sports in the fall? And the second part of my question is, you are allowing club athletes to play during the same season of sport for the first time, I think, in history. Can you talk about that decision and maybe how necessary it was because you had to change the calendar so much?
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Good questions, and I appreciate that. Well, first, the feeling, if we had made this announcement on July 1, it would probably be different than it was today. We have obviously seen what's happened over the last several weeks, especially in the impact that it has made. So that's where we really started to focus on going to 2 seasons and how we might be able to get all of our sports in that way versus 3 seasons that we might have been looking at, and especially looking at potential sports for the fall. But now with the schools not allowing students back on campus, at least for the time being, we didn't think that was going to be very possible in the fall. In terms of your other part of the question, you know, in going forward, our feeling was if we could give regular seasons to the student athletes, section championships as we wanted to, those were going to be our primary focus and the thing that we wanted to do for them and to deliver for them. So that's what we were primarily focused on as this continually changes.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Tony Rosendahl from the High School Narrative.
I do not have a question at this time. Thank you very much, Mr.
Our next question is from Dan Albano from the Orange County Register.
Hi, Commissioner Wygott. Good to talk to you. Some football coaches were surprised that a full 10-game season was proposed. What was the thought process on creating that kind of window? And did it have anything to do with trying to create a window that if there is a stoppage or delay because of the coronavirus, that at least there is that full window that will give you some flexibility in going forward? And then I'll ask you my follow-up question.
Thank you, Dan. I think that in the initial stages, there was some thought of how we would have a football season that could be condensed, but I think that had more to do with the 3 seasons of sport discussion. And as we started to focus more on 2 seasons, we realized that it was going to be more possible to have a full regular season in all the sports. And that was where we shifted in that regard. So the student athletes and coaches and everyone involved in all of our sports are going to be putting in a lot of time and effort. And so we felt that if there was a way to preserve the regular seasons as much as possible and give them the full experiences that they're used to, you know, we really wanted to go in that direction.
Okay, then a follow-up. There's also a thought among high school community that it will be hard to play high school sports if the schools are in distant learning. And I was wondering what your thoughts on that were. And then what about if schools are in a hybrid model where they're doing some online learning and some in person? How do you think high school sports could navigate that?
Well, we've had a consistent message from the beginning, which I still resonates today, and that is that our individual schools, school districts, private schools, will all be determining when their students are going to be returning to campus, first for academics and how that can all be worked out, but then certainly the athletic teams to follow. So it will still be up to those individual schools and school districts and private schools to decide on whether they want to bring their athletic teams back, if they have distance learning, if they have some kind of hybrid plan going forward, or certainly what everyone hopes for, which will be the time that all students will be back on campuses and getting on campus instruction, which is everyone's goal as we move forward.
Our next question is from Kathy Forty of Big Bear Grizzly.
Yes, my main concern question I had is what was the determining factor to place cross country in the winter, we have particularly unique issues up here in Big Bear regarding that particular sport taking place during that season.
When we felt that there wasn't really any options for fall sports in the traditional fall window, then one of our big concerns and one of the things we knew we needed to address was certain natural partnerships, cross country and track, swimming and water polo, those kinds of sports where some of the same student athletes participate in both. And so the decision was keeping track and field in the spring, and cross country obviously would need to be in the fall in this 2-season format. And we wanted to make sure that the cross country athletes would certainly have the opportunity to participate in track and field as well. And that's where we had to go in that direction.
The next question is for Jim Alexander of the Press Enterprise.
Hello, Rob. How you doing?
Hi, Jim. How are you?
I'm good. Given you've talked about whether students are going to be back in classrooms and what have you, if it turns out that by late December, early January, they're still not in classrooms, is there a backup plan to maybe make the schedule that you have even shorter? Or will it get to a point where you just have to say, hey, we can't do this?
I think that's a very good way of framing how this looks going forward. We certainly have hopefully allowed for enough time that we'll get our schools back on campus, our students back there, and the ability for our student athletes to have a semi-normal lead up or well, whatever you want to call it, in preparation for their seasons. They'll have the months hopefully of maybe August or September, October, November to do that kind of preparation that they're normally used to. What we would probably be looking at as we got closer to December and mid-December and the implementation of this calendar is to see if that's even possible, if the local and state health authorities have allowed for students to return to campus, have our schools been able to get back up and running. And at that point, we would have a decision to make. We would probably then, if we're not able to do so, be able to push back into January, maybe allow our football programs to begin their practice and acclimatization in January. The other sports that would have started earlier would then, have to reduce their schedules, and those earlier contests that were scheduled in December would be canceled, basically. And then perhaps we can pick it up in January. The key element is viable league play. There has to be viable league play if we're able to go forward from there. So at some point, if we weren't able to have viable league play for the fall season that we have planned, then we would have to say that season would be canceled. And then we would have to focus on our spring season that would be beginning in late February, early March, hopefully get to that point and be able to launch those sports at that time. And then we would run through the same scenario. If we get to March, still in the same position where it's not feasible for students to be back on campuses or programs to resume, we'd look at when viable league play could still be conducted. By the time we got to that point, if not, then we would have to cancel the spring at that time. So that's how we see it rolling out.
Our next question is from Frank Burleson on basketball.
Hey, Rob, how's it going?
Hey, Frank, how are you?
Pretty good. One question, then I'll have a follow-up. And the first question, I'm not sure exactly how to ask this, but I've seen Eric Sonheimer in some of his tweets and stuff talk about that if, quote unquote, things do get better based on the health guidelines and the leadership in Sacramento and stuff, that perhaps some of the teams could go into kind of, I think he used the term summer mode, which I would interpret to be that unofficial practices or in the case of basketball, unofficial games or summer league games, or as you well know, a large part of the basketball, especially the prominent basketball programs, have pretty heavy fall type of stuff where actually they play directly or indirectly as a team. Is there a point, and not just basketball, where you could see, okay, things are getting better. Maybe we can, more people are back on campus. Maybe we can allow for some more in-depth gatherings of coaches and teams, and fall. What would I guess be now fall league or late summer league games.
Well, exactly, and that was why the decision about extending summertime rules into the the beginning of the school year and all the way through until we start up with our fall sports. That decision was made so that the high schools under summertime rules are under their high school principal's authority. And if their high school principal wants to allow them, of course, again, based on our health and safety protocols and guidelines from our health authorities, and the schools, school districts, private schools have had their students back and are able to resume their programs, then they would have the opportunity to compete as school teams during that summertime rules portion of the school year. During the school year, normally, schools cannot represent themselves as school teams during the school year outside their seasons of sports. So we believe that by extending that summertime rules provision, it gave the schools the flexibility to try to do anything and everything that they can, provided they're allowed to do it. So we thought that would be a positive and something that our schools would appreciate, is that they would have control over how to manage those months leading up to the high school seasons. And even to the point where if they wanted to schedule tournaments, off-season leagues, other kinds of activities, if they're allowed, they'll have every mechanism available to them to do it.
One quick comment on that, and then a follow-up question, if you don't mind. Follow-up question will be pretty simple. In terms of the things you're just describing now, I would assume that, again, I'm alluding to basketball, but a lot of other sports, for all the athletes who normally would have gotten exposure to college coaches and the ability of college coaches to visit campus or watch particular events or non-traditional high school events. This would, in fact, if this were to happen, give those athletes the opportunity to get some exposure that they might have lost out on in the spring and summer.
You're absolutely correct. And so even some of these tournaments that people are used to, let's say basketball tournaments that happen over winter break, the possibility still exists that those can happen. The high school season will be later. And if the principal allows the schools to represent their schools and wear school uniforms and represent them as high schools, then they can certainly put those together as part of their preseason preparation.
And then the follow-up question is, looking at the paperwork that was submitted, that was released in play, it'll just go from sectional championships to state championships.
The specific details from the state office haven't come out at the moment, but the understanding and what they released is that in all of our sports, there would be no more than one more week of state and or
Los Cerritos News.
Hi, Rob. Thank you for taking my question. What is now the 2021 calendar together, and when was the last date that it was finalized?
Well, I think I said earlier, this whole process began almost immediately after we had to unfortunately cancel our spring sports. So I don't think there's been a day that's gone by since that time that there hasn't been discussions either within our own staff here, with our other section commissioners, with our state office friends, with our schools, with athletic directors, with principals, superintendents, Zoom calls, meetings virtually, all kinds of different things. So I would tell you that we probably began, as I said, in April, as soon as this unfortunately was shut down last spring. In terms of a finalizing of this calendar, we held our last meeting with all the section commissioners in the state office last Monday. And then pretty much from that point forward, when the state office and all of us had crystallized around the dates that the state office released, we then got to work very diligently here to make it a southern section calendar, because obviously we had different issues to deal with, such as competition starting dates and other things like that, length of regular seasons and so forth. So as I said, I won't say that I was still working on it last night at midnight, but we certainly got it finalized by the end of this last week.
Next question is from Kyle Stokes from KPCC.
Hi, Commissioner. My question actually sort of dovetails on the last one, and I would like to ask a sort of follow-up to the follow-up then. So if you're saying that the decision, your last meeting with the section commissioners was last Monday, does that mean that this decision preceded the governor's order that effectively closed schools across much of the state? And I'm also just curious if you can comment on kind of like how that order affected thinking. I mean, before the governor issued the order, there was sort of this patchwork of public and private schools. Some publics were going to close and some privates were going to be open. And I'm curious to know if, how the governor's order affected your thinking. Did it clarify it in any way because of that patchwork, or did the order affect your thinking in any other way? I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, again, I want to credit CIF Executive Director Ron Nichetti, because Ron, when there was discussion about potentially earlier release of a potential calendar and so forth, maybe around July 1st, it was Ron who I thought did an effective job of explaining to everyone that we should try to stay as long as we can with what was happening around us before we made a decision. I think what happened over the last few days at the end of last week with the governor's decision actually reinforced what we had come to an agreement on. I think once the governor announced what he announced on Friday, I think all of us believe that actually reinforced the direction that we were heading in, because again, there was a race against time in the fall. I think some of our schools that were trying to get out there and start working out, and certainly credit them for that, and trying to do it in a healthy and safe way, found themselves how cramped it would be and how difficult it would be to be ready for a traditional fall season. And so when the governor made that announcement and those activities take place, at least for the foreseeable future, I think we felt like we're on the right track. I also think that the junior colleges, when they made their announcement, it was fairly in line with what we were thinking as well. So I'm not sure that by the time we were ready to announce today, that it was a huge surprise that we would be moving things back, because that had seemed to be the prevailing thought among everybody as these last few weeks have shown us.
Next question is from Brian of the Santa Clara.
Hello, Commissioner. Does the revised calendar have any impact on transfer rules and/or sit-out periods?
I think I heard you. You were breaking up a little bit, so if I don't get it exactly, please come back with it. I think you asked about transfer rules and sit-out period and so forth. The adjustment of the transfer rule, as you know, actually took place a little while ago, which was the financial hardship, where we wanted to make sure and be cognizant of those who are going through a terrible time financially through this pandemic. So we did make that adjustment in Bylaw 207 to relate to financial hardship and the ability of students, if they have to transfer schools, to have a process for eligibility through that waiver. In terms of the sit-out period and other transfer rules, they remain in place as they are. Those are rules that are put in place by our member schools, and at the current time, that's where our schools are with the transfer rules, besides the one that we did make the adjustment on with financial hardship.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question is from JP Rennery. Sorry, JP, I blew that. Valley News.
No, it's all good. Hey, what's up, Rob?
Hey,
Is there an actual green light date, or are we leaving that up to the schools as far as, when spring can start practicing and fall can start practicing? First question. And then the second one, pretty kind of just, piggybacking off of the sit out period, but we got people transferring left and right. Whatever, I understand the hardship, but, just to transfer to play the sport at a better school, are we gonna? I know there was a huge misunderstanding of, hey, they're gonna waive the sit out period for us this year because of COVID-19, and everybody, let's jump on the bus. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the first part you said, I didn't hear, because I think I was actually talking over you, and I said, people mess my name up all the time. So if you don't mind, I'll get back to, or I can do SOP and transfer now, and then just follow up with me on what you originally said, because I think I missed the first few words of it.
It was just about the green light. Is there a green light date for these sports to start?
Well, the one thing about our section, with the exception of football, is we have never or have not identified practice dates for schools to start. We have used the first day of our seasons as the first day that students and teams can play games. So that will remain the same. Schools, if they see a start date for a particular sport, they have the ability in the off season to do as they pretty much please under the direction of their high school principals. So we won't be identifying specific start dates for any of the sports, except for football, which, because of certain rules that are specific to football, like 14 days of practice before your first game, 10 days of practice before your first scrimmage. Those are clearly identified practice dates because the bylaws require those specific numbers of days before you can compete. Back to your SOP and transfer thing, I'm sure there were plenty of rumors and all kinds of things going on out there prior to what we announced today, and conjecture of what we would do and how it would be done. But as I said, the most immediate issue with COVID-19 was financial, and I think we addressed that appropriately. I think the other transfer issues that may take place due to COVID, those are transfer issues and choices being made by parents or students to transfer schools, depending on the different categories, whether it's valid change of residence or transfer eligibility with sit-out period or whatever those things might be. Again, those rules remain in place today, and they are put in place by our member schools. So that's how we're going forward.
Next question is from Mario Solis of NBC4.
Hey, Rob, thank you for taking this question. Yeah, if we could all mute so we can get these questions in there. You got me? All right, I'll proceed. So how often will the plan be updated based on the fluctuation presented by the virus, and what kind of testing will be done? Will teams have to shut down if these tests come back positive?
Well, thanks, Mario. I think in terms of amending or adjusting the plan, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think this plan remains in place now going forward. And one of the things I thought was really important was if we were going to announce that the fall calendar that was originally set up for this 2020-2021 school year, announcing it today and saying our calendar is good to go, that was 2 weeks or so from now. But if we weren't going to be able to do that, then I was very, very adamant about, then we have to announce a calendar that we will try to implement. I didn't want to say today, well, we can't do what you've expected up to this point, and we'll come back and see you in 6 weeks. That wasn't going to serve anyone. So we were hoping that our schools can get to work and everyone can get to work on what needs to be done now to get this implemented. And then really we'll have to look at how things develop over the next several months. And as we get closer to December, if there has been a gradual return to school and return to campus and return to activities that, again, our health professionals at the state and local level and county level will decide, then obviously the only implementation that would change was we might have to back up just a little bit more up until that point, as I mentioned, where we could no longer have viable league play, and then a decision on a final calendar at that time. But we're not going to be revising it or putting in different dates or whatever going forward, for a while now. We hope that this will give our schools the chance to start making their plans and juggling all the different things they need to juggle to make it work. So we'll stay on this course until, as I said, we probably get into the late November, early December time frame to see exactly where we are.
Yeah, can you address testing protocol and what actions would be taken if tests come back positive?
Well, those aren't really going to be CIF issues. Those are not. We're not going to be involved in the testing protocols or requirements or things that we talk about with student athletes and staff. Those are still going to be schools, school districts, and private school decisions following their local and county, state health authorities. So they're going to be implementing what is specific for their particular schools and districts and private schools. We have 7 counties in the southern section within our footprint. So what may be happening in one county is potentially different than another. Right now, they're all pretty much in the same boat. So as I said, as we move closer to getting students back on campus first for academics, and hopefully bringing the athletic teams next, those testing protocols and procedures and reactions to positive tests or steps taken in that regard, that's going to be up to those folks. That's not going to be a CIF issue.
The next up is Wyatt Smith from KHTS Radio.
Hi there, Commissioner. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Wyatt.
So with, the announcement from the state office today that kind of provided some of those anchor dates for planning the schedules as far as last day for section playoffs, can you just speak to what level of flexibility the Southern section retains as far as crafting its own individual plan versus what's been laid out by the state office?
Yes, and I think I was pretty clear in many of the conversations that we were having leading up to today, in that we would need to have the dates from the state office and then work backward from there for our section to develop our calendar. So once those dates were identified by the state office, then we could work from that point And again, that's where many of the regular season dates and the starting dates for competition and the ability to try to have their separation between sports so that the dual sport athletes could have that opportunity. That's where we have the flexibility. So we certainly would put our section championships right next to the state and regional, because in that way our student athletes don't sit around waiting for those state and regional competitions. We want them to happen as soon as they happen, right after our section is concluded. And so again, our ability to make this adjust and try to work better for the southern section was more on the front end, where we talked about the starting of our competition and then the last league date for competition, so that our leagues would know when the league competition needed to be concluded, and then we could take their entries to go forward for section championships. So that's where we were, taking our own stamp, if you will, on what was released by the state and trying to put it together in the best interest of the southern section.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Next question is from Aubrey Brown of the Century Group.
Volleyball, polo, that are now playing in the same seasons. A lot of those schools have the same coaches.
Aubrey, hold on 1 second. You were muted when you first started your question. Go ahead and start your question again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. Commissioner, I've noticed that polo, tennis, golf, volleyball are now going to be played in the same seasons. A lot of the sports have the same coaches. The facility situation should be a problem, I'm sure. How did you arrive at that decision to schedule those sports in the same seasons?
When we were talking about 3 seasons of sport, one of the things that continually came up is in the winter, basketball, soccer, wrestling, and girls water polo. We have fewer sports in the winter than any of our other seasons of sport. And so as we began to keep looking at the 3 seasons, we realized that the overlap was going to be much more significant. And so what we did with most of the traditional winter sports is we moved them to the spring. We did take girls water polo and move it together with boys water polo in the fall. And we did bring boys volleyball forward into the fall season from the spring. But the thinking behind that was that volleyball and basketball, if we didn't do that, then they would be competing for the gymnasium at the same time. In this format, the boys and girls volleyball programs will be completed before our basketball teams really get going. And so that was our thought process behind it. Yes, there are some schools that have both boys and girls that coach both teams. We know that's going to be a challenge, and we certainly have to rely on our athletic directors and coaches to do the very best they can to make that work. Again, these are unprecedented times, and it's not the way that anybody would want it to happen, but we believe that if we can keep the sports seasons alive and not have to cancel them, that it's going to be incumbent upon all those, and as I call it, the adults. Us adults need to make it work so that the student athletes can have their opportunities, and we've got to be able to provide them a roadmap going forward that does that, and in a positive way, and try to get them focused on something that they can really look to and point to. So again, I'm not going to say that those were issues that weren't discussed or issues that we knew were going to be difficult for schools, but again, we're going to count on our professionals that do this work to try to do it and make it happen for the young people that we're truly thinking of first and foremost.
Next question is from James Escocega of the Southern California News Group.
Thank you, Tom. Great to see you, Rob. One question in 2 parts quickly. What have you learned about yourself and about your membership the past 3 months? Thank you.
Thank you, James. Well, what I learned, I think, from the beginning really is that everyone really hoped that we could find a way to deliver fall, winter, and spring sports for the 2020-2021 school year. It was devastating to cancel in the spring of 2020. And the ramifications of that are still being felt. They will probably always be felt. And so that was a very, very loud and clear message that I think all of our stakeholders were saying to us is let's find a way. Let's find a way to do this. Let's try to keep all of our sports alive. Let's try to give the student athletes coming forward something more positive. And so I've learned a lot from our stakeholders about that. And that has been our primary focus. And and really something that we've taken to heart in trying our best to make that happen.
Okay, next up is Mike G from the 562.org.
Hey, Rob, thanks for doing the press conference. My question is, there's obviously quite a few changes this year. How many of those changes automatically revert back on, June 1st, 2021, and how many of them would have to actively be changed back? My follow-up question would be, what of the things that have been changed are things that you think your section or the state office will continue keeping, whether that's changes to rules regarding simultaneous play or calendars or any of that?
Well, the first one is the adjustments that have been made, such as the financial hardship, the extension of summertime rules, et cetera, the suspension of Rule 600. Those are for this school year. Those will expire at the end of this school year. And our date every year for the beginning of our school year or sports year is July 1. So any of those accommodations, these are for this school year only. I think your second part was about Rule 600 and playing for club teams at the same time. Again, that's a rule that our schools have put in place. And if they want to remove that rule from our bylaws, then they have every mechanism available to them to do it. I will say to you, the last time it was brought up for vote at the CIF Federated Council, the vote was 114 to 23 to keep Rule 600. So again, Executive Director Nichetti, I think in a good move and in a smart move and a proactive move, has said, if we're going to move our seasons that drastically, then we certainly couldn't expect that the off-season club travel activities be prohibited for our student athletes. And so with that in mind, it's going to be suspended for this school year, but it will be back in place afterward. And the only way it won't remain in place is if our member schools across the state of California decide to vote it out.
Right. Next question is from Eric Bull of Dystat.
Rob, thanks for the time. I had a question with regards to the extension of the summertime rules. If the principal allows, how do you see that applying to cross-country athletes that might want to travel to neighboring states, where events might be going on to compete unattached?
Well, again, Eric, that would be something under the control of the high school principal. So if they have their teams back on campus and the high school principal approves of, or maybe their district, they need approval from a school district in the public school, or again, the private school and their leadership. If that is approved by those entities and the health and safety protocols are in place and those activities can be done under the guidelines provided by the health authorities, then certainly that's where the summertime rules come into play. And the flexibility for schools to do that kind of thing is going to be there for them. So that was really a thought behind the idea of trying to support our schools in those kinds of efforts, if it is able to be done. We didn't want to be a barrier to our schools in that regard. We wanted them to have that opportunity if that suited them at the right time and under the right conditions.
And a quick follow-up to that, please. I mean, the same thing would apply, like if they're going to, Nike has already made their decision, but Foot Locker has not. In the event that Foot Locker hosts its national championship meet in December, which would be before the start of the projected season, that they would be allowed, again, because it's not reflection of the school. They're an unattached athlete or a USATF club championship. Like all those things apply, that they could theoretically compete in a national championship meet before they even start their season.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question is from Jim Riggio from Burbank News.
Hi. My question was in regards to the spectators. I know in the past there's been talk about either limiting or not having any spectators, and then also maybe not even having us reporters be able to cover games just because they're trying to limit the number of people on a field. Has any decisions been made on that? And I just wanted to see where we stand on that.
Yes, well, the issue of spectators, again, trying to make sure everyone understands the framework of this. This will still be something up to our schools and to their local health authorities as to whether those kinds of things would be allowed to have spectators inside a gymnasium or in a football stadium or anywhere else that a spectator would want to be. For our purposes, and again, kind of harken back to an earlier question from James, if the decision to play without fans, or a decision to play or not to play at all, I believe our schools are going to play. They're going to want to play, and they're going to want to have these activities happen, even if the health authorities and the particular time frame don't allow for spectators. So that'll be, again, a local decision made, whether they'll allow the spectators or not. But I just get a sense from all of our schools and folks that we have talked to, they want to play. And if that means no spectators, then they would prefer to play that way than to not play at all.
Okay, and then I had a little follow-up, real quick question. Playing football at 7:30 at night, in January, I mean, we could be having some, pretty cold temperatures. Any thoughts of maybe teams playing Saturday afternoons at 1 o'clock because of, just so people don't get sick, the flu season's going to be around, aside from COVID, just the regular flu. Is that a possibility?
Well, it is. I have said from the beginning that all options are on the table. And I think Mondays and Saturdays and maybe traditional days that people may not like to play contests, but, unable to use the school facilities or maybe to have officials coverage, because we haven't talked about that yet, but this is going to be a challenge for our officials too, that we're going to have to put all of those into play. We're going to have to use the maximum amount of hours that we have available to us to make that happen. So again, some of the traditional things that we're used to, at least as we look to the 2020-2021 school year, are things that we're going to have to think a little bit outside what we're used to and try to do everything we can to make that work. I think that's a great suggestion to move, if it's really, really that bad with the inclement weather, to try to make the contest happen in the daytime. That might be really something that would be beneficial, especially in some of our areas that do get the colder weather. We're certainly not like they are up north. I know up north there's going to be even more of that kind of consideration being made. I'm not here to make light or jokes of a pandemic, but my high school football coach always said to me and our teammates, they don't postpone the war when it rains. So, football is played sometimes in bad weather, and that's the case. Certainly January is different than September and October, and we understand that. But as I said, this is where our professionals on the school campuses make the best decisions, make sure that they can do what they need to do to make it happen. And hopefully that's what will happen at the time we may face some inclement weather.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next question is from Joe Curley of the Ventura County Star.
Hi, guys. Just a quick question about some of our coaches have asked me this morning. Is there any guidance that you can give them regarding 0 weeks that have already been scheduled, kind of how to shoehorn that into the 10-week football season?
We understand that, and in terms of that, we realize that there's going to be a lot of schedule changes through this whole process, and not just football, but every single sport. So again, we were trying our best to put together a calendar we felt would give as much time possible to get a full regular season in for football, and have them get the proper acclimatization that we all know they've missed over several months now. And we're hoping that these upcoming months will allow them to get some of that normalized activity to go. So in terms of the football season, it was just determined that it was going to be weeks 1 through 10. We felt that was the best and most efficient way to go forward with that. Football does need the biggest window, and so we were realizing that as we were trying to schedule things out. Any sport really didn't have the size of the window needed for their regular season than football does when you include practices, and so therefore that was the decision. 0 week right now, again, with that flexibility, with bye weeks, we just didn't feel like there was room for bye weeks this particular coming year, especially trying to make sure we could separate some of the sports seasons. So I understand we had a lot of questions today already from coaches about 0 week, a lot of questions about whether they can scrimmage or not. They can scrimmage. They can scrimmage as long as they have their 10 days of practice prior to the scrimmage, as the bylaw allows. But in terms of having that 11 weeks to play 10 or 0 week opportunities and starting different start times so that 0 week teams would start before week 1 teams, we have a standardized start date for everybody. We have standardized 1 through 10 for the weeks of the regular season, and that's the plan that we've submitted today.
Next up is David Hill from HSPN.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rob, for letting me ask that question. My question, I think I'd answered before, but I guess my question is, it probably reverts back to the schools, but the protocol for us being able to cover events. I'm kind of curious as to how that might go. Is that something that's going to land in your office, or does that land with the school itself?
Well, we're fortunate with Assistant Commissioner Tom Simmons here, who coordinates all of our media relationships and everything that happens in terms of our schools as well. So I think Tom is going to be a valuable resource in that area for any members of the media who would have questions about that or would want to know more about what the protocols are. But I do think, and you sort of alluded to it, that you're going to be working with your local schools and to find out what it is that they are working through in terms of allowing spectators, allowing reporters, and who will be brought into their facilities to cover athletic events. So, I think between Tom as a resource here from our office, and then obviously your local contacts, that the schools that you cover and you work with, just great communication is going to be necessary. Everyone's got to be on the same page and making sure that we're all communicating in advance so everyone knows the expectations and everyone can be prepared to hopefully be able to cover. We certainly want that. I know our schools want that. I know all of you want that. We'd love to have you there. So as long as it's healthy and safe for you to be in those facilities, hopefully that can happen.
Okay, next up, Zach Kavanaugh from the San Clemente News.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having the conference today. My question is regarding what kind of situation. I mean, this is something that's still obviously going to be able to develop, but when it comes to the schools being open, as it is a county by county basis, as set out by the state, is there a situation where, say Orange County opens up, but LA hasn't opened up, Riverside is open, San Bernardino isn't, especially with how many counties there are in the southern section, in terms of what is there any sort of contingency plan for going forward with that, or is there a drop dead number of schools that need to be able to participate? What's kind of the thought there in terms of if some counties are open but others aren't by the time the schedule comes up?
Well, I think that's a really good question that I'm not sure I'm able to answer on July 20th. I think I was talking about this a lot over the time frame that I've spoken to many of you and to others, that it was going to be incumbent upon how many of our schools were back before we would know whether we can go forward. And I don't think we're going to know that until we get closer to the time that this calendar is implemented. So you're right. There are 7 counties within our section, and I want to commend our county offices. We actually had a call with all the county offices of education recently and kind of established a dialogue with all of them, which was great for us as a Southern Section office to have that kind of contact now with those folks in the county offices. And I think as, again, we get closer, our calendar's there. People will know what it's going to be. Hopefully they'll be able to be out there and be able to participate. But if not, then we're going to respect those decisions. We're going to respect those schools, school districts, and private schools who don't feel it is appropriate for them yet or are not able to get back out there yet and proceed accordingly. So as I said, I can foresee what you're talking about. And the only thing I can offer is that we just need to be a little bit closer to actual implementation to know what that really looks like. So I appreciate you bringing it up, though. It's certainly a valid point.
Next up is Eric Sondheim.
Good afternoon. I know you spent lots of time with your fellow commissioners discussing the club sports issue because it involves lots of questions. I would like to know how you envision and project allowing high school athletes to participate in club and high school sports simultaneously might play out, since there are coaches coaching club sports and you have football teams that want to play 7-on-7 in the spring. You have softball teams, you have water polo, you have soccer. How do you envision this playing out?
Well, I think it's going to be done at the local level and on the school campus and among the school's coaching staffs and athletic directors and so forth. I mean, we just felt that it really was unrealistic if we were going to have such a drastic change to our sports calendars and then turn right back around and say, but you cannot participate in contests for any non-high school team during the 2 seasons of sport that we have. We just didn't feel that was a reasonable expectation. And so, again, I think Ron Nichetti was was correct in bringing this issue forward. And I think the commissioners agreed that we would allow students and coaches and others the flexibility to make the choices they need to make. One of the things that I think that's going to be really important going forward, however, is I think we've been very clear now where we're going in the direction with high school sports. But we don't operate in a vacuum. And if the club and travel and other organizations, if ever we are hopefully together on something, it would be over these next few months. Because if the club and travel activities and many of the things that are going on go on uninterrupted, and students are out there and they're traveling all over and there's all kinds of interactions, I'm not sure that's going to be in everyone's best interest going into the mid-December through June calendar that we have. So if anything, you know, I would call upon our travel and club and the outside organizations that work with us. You know, we're making an accommodation so our students can do both. And I sure hope that there's a way that maybe they'll consider getting on the same page with us. Because if not, then everything that they may want to do will be shut down as well as we'll be shut down. And none of us will be able to proceed. So that's how I see it. You know, I've seen some quotes of some student athletes who talk about it. They're thinking about what it means to be part of high school and or club at the same time, or having to choose between the two. But again, I'm going to count on and hope for our athletic professionals out there to try to do everything they can to support our student athletes. Because it's about
I understand the reasoning. That makes perfect sense. I would like you to project and give us a vision what it's going to be like when people are making that choice. Do you see them dropping out if they have to play club volleyball in January or football passing tournament? What do you envision when you were discussing with the commissioners?
Well, we envisioned exactly what I think I've just said, is that these are going to become individual decisions by student athletes and their families in one respect, and they're also going to be decisions by coaches who wear multiple hats and coach either high school and or club both together. I mean, those are where those decisions are going to be made. For me to stand here as the commissioner of the Southern section and say, well, I think it's going to be this way. I think more students will choose high school, or more students will choose club, or more coaches will decide to do their club activities and forego high school, or the other way around. I don't think I'm informed enough to know enough about what's going to happen on a grand scale. I think we're going to see all different versions of the possible scenarios. I think, you know, I read in your newspaper the other day, probably the best high school girls volleyball player we have was commenting on her belief about high school and club and where she felt she might land when the time came to make that decision. And I just think that's where these decisions are going to be made. We'll be following those decisions, sure. We'll be seeing how they play out. But I can't say today that, oh, I think all the students will choose club, or I think all the students will choose high school, or the coaches will decide that they're going to do their club activities and forget high school. I just don't know that that's the case, because we've never done this before either. This is uncharted territory. And we'll have to see how this plays out when the first time that in my years and in anybody's memory that the actual Rule 600 is going to be waived, and it's a new opportunity out there to see what that means.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next question is from Amanda Skurlock of the LA Sentinel.
Hi, my question is, how did those talks go with the other commissioners, and how much did those kind of conversations kind of help you create the schedule for the teams?
Thanks, Amanda. You know, these were interesting discussions, obviously, because we're in 10 different sections and we're in 10 different places. And some of our sections are primarily school district based, such as Los Angeles or Oakland, San Francisco, and a heavy influence in the San Diego section is the San Diego Unified School District. So, you know, the school districts are coming at this from a certain point of view. We have sections in the far north of our state where the case numbers were much, much lower, and some of the effects of this pandemic haven't been felt as much as they have in some of our densely populated areas of the state. So, you know, everyone has their perspective, and everyone had to bring forward the concerns and the things that were unique in a way and germane to their particular locations. So I just want to commend all the section commissioners and Ron Nichetti and Brian Seymour from the state office, who was a big part of this. You know, we're colleagues and we represent sections, but I think we're truly friends too. And I think we really care about each other and we want to support each other. And so, you know, we certainly didn't always think the same or have the same point of view. But, you know, by the time we had worked on this and worked on this and worked on this, we did come to consensus. and we did feel that what we were bringing forward was the very best options and the best plan we possibly could in support of our student athletes. So, it was an ongoing process, as I mentioned. We began months ago, and we stayed in touch, and we had many calls and many different scenarios over the months that we've been through. As I mentioned, July 1, the scenario was different than July 20th. So again, I don't think we get here. I don't think we could have put together what we were able to put together if we didn't have that sense of community among all of us, and just, again, trying to keep our focus on the student athletes and doing everything we can for them. So that's kind of how it was over the last several months.
Next question is from Rich Gonzalez, Prep Cal Track.
Thank you. Real quick, Rob, two things. First off, in regards to sanctions for tournaments and invitationals, will there be any more restrictive move by the section office in regards to denying those teams that wish to travel across state lines or come in from out of state given that we have these ever-changing hotspots? And second thing, the National Federation office went ahead and gave some guidance for various sports. For cross country, there was a recommendation of staggered starts if we're in a certain phase in terms of risk. Is that something that we're looking at for postseason at this point in time?
Yeah, on the first
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Rich. I'm sorry.
That's it. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. In terms of the sanctions and so forth, again, I think that's an area that is not really specific to the CIF or even the Southern section. These are going to be decisions that are made by the health authorities and the local schools who immediately supervise their student athletes and their staffs. So if it's deemed healthy and safe for them to travel to another state, participate in a competition, it's going to be their decision. And if it's a sanctioned event, meaning it's a high school event during the high school season, as you know, we don't sanction or have any effect on off-season competition. Then those will be able to take place, I would imagine, if the health authorities are allowing those to happen. In terms of your idea of staggered starts and other ways of looking at a cross-country competition, I think, again, I go back to a pretty common refrain that many of you have heard me say. All options are on the table. I don't think there's any reason for us to dismiss a potential option that could help allow our student athletes an opportunity to compete. So I've got some great experts like you and a few others that work with us in the cross-country world, and I'm sure that if there was a way to do it, we'll be able to do it and try to preserve the integrity of our competition and again, keep the ability for our student athletes to participate alive as best we can, take every effort we can take to make it happen.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rich.
Next up, Jose Quintero from the Desert Dispatch.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So with the late start of the football season, will that have any impact on the start of the 2021-22 season, since football is usually into the spring activities around March?
Well, we hope that we're able to have a regular 2021-2022 school year. And in that regard, that we would have our normal calendar that we would go forward with for that particular school year. And it's certainly our hope and intention that we never have to come back to cancel a season as we did last spring or have to do what we're doing now. So as of now, and you're right, our football season could extend into, at least in the southern section, the first week of April, second week of April. Then we would hope that our schools, our coaches, our professionals would be smart in going forward and give their student athletes enough time to recover and get ready for another season to go much quicker than normal. But certainly, I think we would like to see things as back to what we're used to in 2021, 2022, and part of that would be to stay with our original calendars.
Okay, we have a follow-up from Fred Robledo. Fred.
Fred, you're muted.
Nobody needs to comment on that.
There you go.
Has there been any consideration of whether it be, you have these next few months to look at, the playoffs and how you schedule them? Could you move to anything that's more geography based? I know a lot of the schools are concerned about the travel. You have all these sports. Some up in Almonte, maybe having to go to deep Orange County, or Duke, Ventura, San Bernardino County, is there any consideration for at least 1 year making them more geography based, just to make it a little easier on everybody and more financially reasonable?
Well, I certainly understand your question, and I guess what it does is it puts us in what you would call a conundrum. We have had such a strong message from our member schools about competitive equity playoffs, and even to the point where just last May, when we had our final council meeting of the year, and the football proposal was on that calendar, as well as our swim and dive proposal, basically extending the idea of competitive equity playoffs even deeper, with football using regular season results, and then swim and dive being the first individual sport to have competitive equity playoffs and start down that road. So if you're going to have the competitive equity playoff system in place, then you have to understand that the geographic factors don't become as important as the competition factors. So at this point, our plan is to go forward as we plan to go forward, without considering geography necessarily, because that's been the message from our member schools, is they would rather see competitive equity playoffs versus regional and more geographic based playoffs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Tim Burt from the OC Sports Zone. Tim, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right, thank you very much. I had some other questions, but I have a new one because all the other ones have been asked. Tom and Rob, I just want to ask how this will affect the boys and girls basketball tournaments, which are normally held in November and December. Are they going to be rescheduled? Could they be rescheduled?
Well, as I mentioned, I think under summertime rules, those tournaments can actually take place if the schools have the authority from their high school principal to go out and represent their own school teams in those various tournaments. They will be conducted during the off season for boys and girls basketball this coming year, but there really isn't anything that would limit that opportunity. What that will mean, I know some of these tournaments require a lot of out-of-state travel maybe, or certainly across sections travel, or schools coming from a lot of different places here to play, or our schools heading other places. But, as I said, it was part of this look forward to say, how do we make this easier for our schools? Many of those tournaments are fundraisers. And so there is still the ability to have those tournaments, to use them for the purposes that they are used for, and go ahead and allow those to happen as soon as, again, the health authorities allow it. So as I mentioned, winter break now, it will be a little different winter break. I mean, there will be just a few sports that just got started, but our soccer and basketball and some of our wrestling, our winter sports that are always used to having tournaments over that time frame, there isn't anything that's holding them back from doing it again this year. And I think that was really important, and we thought that would be really important to our member schools. And that's why it's been structured in that format, with the whole school year basically beginning under summertime rules, and those will continue up into our schools get ready to play their high school seasons of sport.
So basketball tournaments could be played during the summer, is that correct?
Well, I mean, the summer is almost over, and
Right.
we're under summertime rules now, and those are just going to continue on. So, but again, I think the summer, when I say summer over, I'm just meaning in terms of the resumption of school, whether it's on campus, online, or in a hybrid format. But the summertime rules will be extended and will continue. So our rules won't be changing, but certainly there will be some changes when it comes to the actual start of the school year, because as we know from last week, no schools at this point are even allowed to bring students on campus yet. And we hope that changes. We hope that changes soon. But until that time, I can't imagine there's going to be any high school tournaments happening if the students aren't even back on campus yet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Jim Alexander, Press Enterprise.
Well, Fred asked the one question I was going to ask about travel, but I can use that to kind of dig at him about being able to use the mute button. But the other question I have is, Rob, are there ways that the section can assist various schools or various districts in terms of testing and other health protocols and helping to facilitate things like that?
Well, again, Jim, I think we would be treading into an area that really isn't our area to tread into, and we don't have the authority in those areas. So, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but we have schools, for example, we've been asked the question about why isn't there drug testing? The CIF conduct drug testing. Well, there are drug testing programs out there, but they're run by our schools, and they're run under the procedures and protocols that are for those schools, school districts, or private schools to run them. So, that I think we have to kind of look at that extending even into this, in that, those are just things that are going to have to be done on an individual basis at the different school levels and school sites that are in play here. These are students that don't attend schools on our campus, or these are not students that we have that direct responsibility of supervision for. Those are done at the local school level. So I do think that's the way this is going to be handled going forward, because it's really the only way it can be. And I know that the CIF Sports Medicine Advisory Committee has published guidelines for schools on how to return to play and how to return to these activities. And again, some of the testing protocols and some of the things that are going to be required, those are going to have to come from the health professionals as we get, hopefully, working forward to students being back on campus.
Okay, thank you.
Next question is from Mo Orr of the High School Narrative.
Thank you, and thank you for having this Zoom call there, Rob. I have a question about the officials, and I just wanted to see if you guys took into consideration, and when making this decision, did you guys speak to the assigners for each prospective sport as to scheduling, as most officials work multiple sports?
Well, we didn't have the opportunity, I think you can imagine, in a state as large as ours and so forth, to be talking to virtually every assigner out there to try to find out where they were coming from. Certainly have dialogue with officials here in our office, I know, and a lot of different ones. And as you know, we are experiencing a shortage of officials now. And it's across a lot of sports, and it's across our section. And so that's a challenge for us already. You throw this into it, and the condensed schedules and the certain things that are going to be coming forward for this school year, I don't see how that helps the matter in any way. But, we also, and this has just been some of our past experience, that we see in difficult economic times, we actually see an increase in people who are willing to get into officiating. We've seen that over the years. And I know in talking with our officials, the most important thing for them was to figure out what the calendar was going to be. And then they were going to get to work on that. But our schools need to help us too. Our schools need to help identify students that have maybe recently graduated and, they're still around the area, maybe going to college. Our schools need to try to identify some of their recent graduates and maybe try to get them involved in officiating and turn them over to our officials associations and so forth. I mean, with 560 member schools, if each school brought one young man or one young woman to the officiating world, that's 500 plus new officials, just one from every school. So, we have to do our part at the school level too. I know the officials try really hard to recruit and get officials to join and stay on board with them. But, everyone's got to realize that it's everybody's issue. Everybody involved at the schools and at the officials, we have to do all we can to try to get more officials out there. And then obviously, again, use the Mondays, the Saturdays, maybe not the most traditional ways and days that people want to play. But some of those are going to have to be utilized. Double headers, different things where the same officials can work more than one contest. Some of the things that, again, we may not be, ideally looking to do, but for this particular year, as we get ready to go forward, this is some things that have to be considered.
Next question is from JP again.
Hey, real quick, just wanted to ask Rob, and you're a trooper for standing up this long, by the way, but can you chime in on the Northwestern, the section decision made today, and did you guys have any, was that ever a thought on kind of just being like, nah, we're going to do our own thing?
Well, help me with that decision, because since this morning, I honestly haven't seen anything like that. So
okay, so immediately after the state decision, the Northwestern section said, no, we're going to go ahead and go with fall sports as planned.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, and that was discussed in some of our meetings. I didn't know that. I mean, they talked about the possibility of that happening, and like I said, I wasn't aware that they officially have gone on board to say that. And I think the position of the state office and any of us as sections is, kind of back to what I said a little bit earlier too, what's happening up there is not happening necessarily here. So if they believe that they would prefer the option to go ahead and conduct their seasons of sport now or in the traditional fall window, they certainly can do that. But there is now a clear calendar for CIF regional, CIF state competition, and obviously you get one season of sport in a school year, in a particular school year. So if that's if the choice that they would prefer to make, then they have the right to do that. But obviously they wouldn't have the opportunity to participate later when the CIF seasons of sport would have their competitions.
Next up is Kathy Porty, Big Bear Grizzly.
Hi, I just had one more question. I think, Rob, you and I have discussed this before, talking about financial hardships. Changing football to winter, for example, for Big Bear means that they might not be able to have any home games because of snow. It could present financial hardship because of travel, or would there be an option for them to maybe delay a game? We already play on Saturday at home, to change it to a Sunday game if in case of weather.
Well, the Sunday rule is a statewide rule, and it's not anything that I have the authority to waive or to set aside. So, I think to say here today, the Sunday would not be a potential possibility. You and I did talk about it, and I know in my days as the assistant commissioner in charge of football, there were times that Dave Griffiths and I would have some excellent conversations about playoff games and what the circumstances would be at Big Bear, and sometimes they did come down the hill and play at one of the local high schools down the mountain and do that kind of thing. So again, it would be a home game, but I know that maybe not the numbers of people in Big Bear would be able to come down the hill to watch it. But I think we're just going to have to see some of these things play out. I don't know that we have a one-size-fit-all type of solution for each school and each particular issue that they might have that faces them. So, again, I've said since we started this too, let's hope that we have good weather. Let's hope that the months of January and February are pretty good to us, and we'll be able to get through some of that time frame without anything really drastic happening. We'll hopefully keep our fingers crossed, and maybe things will start to break our way a little bit, as lately it certainly hasn't broken our way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just so everybody knows, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more questions, and then we're going to be done. So we're taking no more questions in the chat. The next question is for Rich Gonzalez.
Tom, I'm good.
Okay, thanks.
Tom, I'm good, actually, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Then we'll go to Eric Bull. Guys.
Sorry, hold on. Okay, just want to make sure I was off mute. Rob, obviously having to deal with the tough decisions that were made already in 2020, obviously the state having to cancel the basketball championships, obviously you guys waiting as long as possible to try to make the decisions with regards to spring sports. How important is it for the CIF Southern section, and then you obviously as a member section to the state, that if a season starts, that it can be seen to completion? Because like in the event that obviously you have more flexibility with the fall, but like specifically for the spring, was any discussion made with you and Ron and and Brian and all the other section commissioners that with the baseball championships, softball championships, track and field championships already going to the weekend of June 25th, 26th, like would you guys be willing to extend that into July, or has that even been discussed at this point?
Not really been discussed yet. I think, we know that that's even late for a lot of our schools, that a lot of our schools will probably be out, if not all of them will be out by June 26th. So we know that's a reality. I think in looking forward, it's one of those things where we want to keep it as alive as we can keep it, as I mentioned. And so the biggest reason maybe too that people hopefully understand about the traditional fall, there was a lot of talk about girls golf, girls tennis, maybe even girls volleyball, cross country, potentially making it in there. Boys water polo, football was looked at a little bit differently, but some of the first sports that I mentioned, and the biggest fear that we had was if these sports were ready to go potentially, and we were able to do that, the worst thing in the world would be to get them started and then have to pull them back and say, no, we have to shut you down, and then not really have another opportunity for them to go forward later. And I think we were, again, about July 1 or so, if we were making this announcement, it might have been something that we were more looking to have happen. But I think we've seen in this month alone just how much that has changed. And the biggest thing everyone has to realize, the change is the schools and the schools not being open and not having students on campus. That's what happened to us in April. And last Friday, it's kind of what happened to us with the governor's announcement. And people have to realize that. Having fall sports, yes, maybe our girls golfers could get around a golf course right now, but they're not on campus. They won't be at school. They won't be part of a campus where the high school principal, athletic director, and so forth would have them driving in cars or vans to go to a golf match, or our tennis teams getting on a bus to go to a tennis match. So I think people need to really understand that. The game changer in all of this has been the ability of our schools to be open for academics first. And without that, in the foreseeable future, I think you can all see why we're in the position that we're in today.
All right, next up, Eric Sonheimer, did you have a follow-up? I don't hear Eric, so we'll go ahead and go to Victor Bryant.
Thanks. How flexible are you with regards to changing CIF divisions or shaking up the format based upon some member institutions being able to compete and others potentially not being able to compete due to COVID-19?
What we wanted to do, Victor, is we wanted to keep things as they are. So I think I hopefully am addressing what you're asking. If we're in a situation, let's say in the sport of volleyball for boys or girls, or soccer for boys and girls, and there are certain leagues that we're not able to compete, we're not able to have viable league play, and therefore couldn't send entries onto section championships. We're going to keep our divisions intact as they have been announced. We're going to keep them the same. That could result in some brackets having 32 teams like they normally would in soccer or basketball. But they might be 16-team brackets or 18-team brackets or 14-team brackets, if you follow what I'm saying. We're just going to have a situation where we're not going to shuffle divisions. We're not going to say, well, we only got a certain number of teams in a different division, so we'll take some teams above or teams below to fill it up or reduce down the number of divisions. We thought it was really important to have the same number of champions, the same number of divisions, give our student athletes the same opportunities that they always have. And if that meant a smaller bracket in a particular division based on leagues that were not able to make it, or really schools that aren't able to come forward, then that's what we would do to maintain the competitive equity, the integrity of that, versus trying to shuffle them up and change the competitive equity.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Frank Burleson, you get the last question.
Okay, sorry about that. Real quick, just so that I'm sure, and if you don't mind, a real simple follow-up question. I want to be sure now, Rob, when you were talking about schools, if the local health, protocol is in shape, and schools will allow their coaches to use gyms or fields or whatnot. If in fact high school teams outside the sport of competition, the season of competition, using basketball as an example, were to host a tournament in December, quote unquote, a tournament in December, or go out of state and plan a tournament, those games in fact will not count into the overall record of the season of play, which from what I gather, basically March 12th to near the end of June. So basically anything that happens in that regard is basically treated like a fall league event or a summer league event.
That is correct. There's one season of sport for basketball. It's going to start up in March. It's going to go through June. Anything that happens prior to that time frame, it will be under summertime rules, meaning schools can represent their schools and their teams if their high school principal approves of that. And therefore, any of those tournaments or games or leagues or anything that's happened, provided health and safety protocols are in place and the local and state health authorities allow it, then those will be able to take place and happen as they will.
So that to take it to the extreme example, again, not just basketball, which is obviously the sport I'm most attuned with. But baseball, for example, if a baseball coach in a program was cleared by the school and the health situation was okay, they could literally schedule 2, 3, 4 tournaments while waiting for the season to start.
That is correct.
Okay, and one last thing relative to the, I want to be sure on, based on the dates, could you, am I right in assuming that, let's say, after the Southern Section playoffs are complete on, for example, June the 12th, then those, you will select your state representative from the sectional champions, or will you have some, will there be some form of regional play?
Well, you know, like I said earlier, Frank, we don't know exactly what the state office will be doing in terms of their format. Their typical 2-week-long tournament and regional play leading up to state championships obviously is now condensed down into 1 week. So they haven't developed the specifics yet. And obviously, whatever those specifics are, then, you know, our teams will be forwarded in whatever way that they are to be forwarded from our section championships.
Appreciate it, Rob. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate you.
Rob, any closing statements?
Just again, I thank everybody for joining us today. I look forward to what lies ahead. I hope that everyone has taken to heart what we've talked about, which is we need to keep the focus on our student athletes. We need to be thinking about them, the negativity that they've had to deal with. And I hope today that we took a major step towards a positive move forward. And I think that's what we need to do, is to present that unified front, let our student athletes know that we're here for them. We're going to do everything we can to make this happen for them. And regardless of how difficult that might be for us, we want to be able to look back and show them what we were able to achieve. And then we can look back on all of this and say, well, we really got it done. And we did it for these student athletes first and foremost and always. So again, my thanks to everybody. I'm going to put my mask back on and wish you all the best of luck. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate y'all joining on the call, and stay safe.
Nice job. Thank you.